Joseph Booth was an English Baptist missionary in British Central Africa. Early career. Little is known of Booth's childhood, but his mother died when he was 12 and his 3 elder sisters brought him up. His father was a Unitarian, but by the age of 14 Booth questioned his father's religious beliefs and, as he could not live with those beliefs, he left home. Over the next few years, Booth educated himself through extensive reading and, before he was 20, he turned to the Baptist Church. He married his first wife, Mary Jane Nequity Sharp, in 1872. He also adopted radical ideas about politics, economics and society. In 1880, Booth emigrated first to Auckland, New Zealand, and then to Melbourne, Australia, where he became a successful businessman. His business success helped to develop his later views on self-reliance and the economic basis of missionary work. From 1886, Booth became more active in his local Baptist church and more fundamental in his beliefs. In 1891 he was challenged by an atheist to practice what he preached, sell all his goods and go to preach the word. He sold his business and, in July 1891, he agreed to become a missionary in East Africa. Despite the death of his first wife, Mary Jane, in Melbourne in October 1891, he left Australia with his 2 young children and started his missionary career, choosing to work in Africa. He aimed to set up the type of self-supporting Baptist mission that William Carey had pioneered in India, combining teaching and commercial activities. Booth first came to Africa in 1892 with his daughter Emily, and worked to establish the Zambezi Industrial Mission at Mitsidi, close to Blantyre. As the mission needed to become self-supporting, Booth decided to locate close to the existing commercial center and market of Blantyre. Although the foundation of the Zambezi Industrial Mission is often dated from 1892, the land for the mission was purchased in 1893 and its main buildings came into use in 1894. Booth also founded the Nyasa Industrial Mission in 1893, the Baptist Industrial Mission in 1895, and several others in later years. He organized and supported several other schemes with similar aims, including the African Christian Union, the British Christian Union, and the British African Congress. At the Zambezi Industrial Mission, he recruited local farmers to plant coffee, and within a year a significant acreage was being grown. Before 1896, Booth made no dramatic calls for political or social change. He was more concerned with establishing and running the missions and raising financial support in Britain. However, his experiences during this period increased his awareness of colonial issues. This was to influence his later advocacy of Africa for the native Africans instead of for Europeans, a view unpopular with colonial authorities and most European missionaries of the time. Although he began a number of institutions, some of which, including the Zambezi Industrial Mission, survive today as the missions are local churches in Malawi, other institutions he founded failed. After setting these institutions up, Booth usually did not remain with them for long, and the survival was due to their own efforts. The failure of the others was often caused by lack of finance, natural disasters, or deficient personnel, factors Booth could not control. However, some institutional failures arose from Booth's weaknesses, including his restlessness and his inability to compromise with any lack of commitment by his colleagues, of the failures of society. By 1896, Booth's disagreements with his colleagues over finance, doctrine and especially African independence led to him ending of his associations with the Zambezi Industrial Mission and the Nyasa Industrial Mission. In March 1896, Booth married his second wife, Annie Akuti Watkins. During a short visit to Britain, he made a trip to Britain and the United States in 1897, taking along his former household servant John Chillimway. Chillimway stayed in Virginia to study as a Baptist pastor and later returned to Nyasaland, where he led the Chillimway Uprising in 1915. By 1898, Booth had become a convinced Sabbatarian, which became one of the guiding principles for the rest of his life, and he turned to the Seventh-day Baptists to support his missionary activities. Booth returned to Central Africa in 1899 and established a new mission for the Seventh-day Baptist Church in Thielo District. In 1900, Booth succeeded in establishing a short-lived institute to produce African leaders for the Seventh-day Baptist Church. 2 years later, the institute was discontinued, although Booth pointed out that the existing elementary schools could not produce African pastors, and the production of African church leaders was essential to promoting African development. This setback prompted Booth to leave Nyasaland for South Africa in 1901. After becoming a Seventh-day Adventist in Cape Town in 1902, Booth went to the United States and convinced the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Plainfield, New Jersey to fund the establishment of a mission near Blantyre, originally called Plainfield Mission and later renamed Malamulo. Booth's stay with the Seventh-day Adventist Mission at Malamulo ended after 6 months. His colleagues did not accept his radical views and criticized him for the political implications. Booth continued his pro-African efforts, producing a petition in 1899 to the Commissioner Alfred Sharp, which demanded that the whole protectorate should revert to African control in 21 years and that all of the hut tax revenue should be spent on African education, including higher education for at least 5% of Africans. These views did not go over well with the colonial administration, and Sharp tried to arrest and deport Booth for his seditious remarks. Before this could happen, Booth escaped to Mozambique, remaining there until in 1900 Sharp allowed Booth to return subject to a promise not to take part in political activities. Booth left Nyasaland for the last time in 1902, traveling first to Durban, which he left in February 1903, to travel to Britain. Booth was officially barred from returning to the Nyasaland in 1907. Later career. Booth remained in Britain until late 1906, as the Adventists were unwilling to send him back to Africa and the Church of Christ turned him down as a missionary because he was too political. While in Scotland in 1906, Booth became familiar with the writings of Charles Taze Russell, a prominent Christian restorationist columnist and founder of the Bible student movement. In late 1906, journeyed to the United States and met Russell in New York. Russell's Watchtower Society appointed Booth as a missionary. As Booth was banned from returning to Nyasaland, he went in 1907 to Cape Town. There he planned to train African evangelists to establish largely independent churches in the home areas that would be only loosely overseen by Booth and financed from America. Booth met Elliot Kamwana again in Cape Town, and converted him to Watchtower beliefs. Booth preached his doctrine of Africa for the Africans in public in Cape Town, which gained him some notoriety. He combined Watchtower millennialism with an insistence on the seventh day. This ultimately led to his expulsion from Watchtower in late 1909, after Russell had tried to convince Booth to stop his seventh-day preaching. Before this, Booth had directed Kamwana to return to Nkehata Bay in Nyasaland, where he baptized and converted about 10,000 people to Watchtower in a few months in late 1908 and early 1909. These activities led to his deportation. Another disciple of Buddha based in Nyasaland, Charles Domingo, who was educated at the Livingstonia Mission, became a Seventh-day Baptist in 1907 and received funding for his activities from Buddha until Buddha was deported in 1909. Booth predicted that by 1914 Europeans no longer would rule Africa, but that there would be democracy, African self-rule and unity with American blacks. These teachings, his criticism of taxation, and the suspicion of Booth because his associate, Elliot Kamwana, had been arrested and deported from Nyasaland, led to his deportation from Transvaal in mid-1909, although he remained in South Africa. Referring to Booth and his African associate Elliot Kamwana, a 1976 Watchtower publication noted, "They never became Bible students at Jehovah's Christian Witnesses." The relationship with the Watchtower Society was short and superficial. Booth's teachings included advocating for social change, which disagreed with the Watchtower literature he distributed, particularly in the case of Booth, who had a 3-year association with, was appointed as a missionary by and financed by Watchtower. This appears disingenuous and misleading. During 1910, the Watchtower movement in Nyasaland split apart, becoming an independent Seventh-day Baptist movement supported by Booth. Booth and Kamwana's later distribution of literature and activist teachings began what came to be known as the Watchtower movement in Central Africa, now known as Watisitawala or Kitawala in Congo. In 1915, Booth produced a British African Congress petition, demanding that educated Africans should have the same political rights as Europeans, and was again deported from South Africa in October 1915. Over the next few years in England, he was involved in pacifist protest against the First World War. He was allowed to return to South Africa in 1919, to the house his daughter, Mary, had built some considerable distance from Cape Town, which discouraged him from any active involvement in African affairs. Booth's second wife died there in 1921, and he married his third wife, Lillian, in May 1924 when he was 73 and she about 49. Booth and his third wife later returned to England because of his ill health and because Booth's contacts with Africans were attracting the attention of the authorities. He remained in England, suffering periodic illness, until he died in 1932. His daughter, Emily, would later write of their experiences in Africa. Bibliography: Owen J. M. Kalinga and Cynthia A. Crosby, Historical Dictionary of Malawi, 3rd ed., pp. 40-41. H. W. Langworthy. Joseph Booth, Prophet of Radical Change in Central and South Africa, 1891–1915, Journal of Religion in Africa, Volume 16, 1, pp. 24–43. Harry Langworthy, Africa for the African. The Life of Joseph Booth. R. I. Rothberg. The Rise of Nationalism in Central Africa. The Making of Malawi and Zambia, 1873–1964, Cambridge, Harvard University Press. K. Fiedler, The Story of Faith Missions, OCMS, p.